Hey, this is March 30th, 2015. This is Aaron Murakami, and I'm sitting here with Graham Gunderson. And Graham is a longtime researcher and developer in the so-called free energy field, if you want to call it that. Overunity research, some of the,
We always call it breakthrough energy.
breakthrough
There's
energy.
conventional
Yeah.
energy if you like coal.
Right.
There's alternative energy if you like wind and solar,
Yeah.
but it's going to have trouble powering the whole world. We
Right.
need a breakthrough.
Right. And so, you have a long history with these technologies, and we can maybe go into a little bit of your background after.
Sure.
And Graham is going to be one of the presenters at the 2015 Energy Science and Technology Conference on July 10, 11, and 12 in downtown Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And the website for that is energyscienceconference.com. You can go on there, look at the schedule, see some of the other speakers. Graham will be sharing the stage with people like John Bedini, Eric Dollard, Paul Babcock, Jim Murray, a lot of the people who are, kind of considered some of the pioneers of the modern, free energy or Tesla science movement, whatever you want to call it. And so the presentation that you're going to be doing is based on a device that you were working on and kind of stumbled upon a certain principle and realized that there were some energy gains there, and you were looking into that. You want to kind of go into a little bit about that?
Yeah, you bet. This didn't come about by any conscious effort, I don't think. One thing that amazes me is there's some inventors that come out with a theory and they follow that theory, and then it works. That must be really nice, because there was no theory here. There's plenty of knowledge about how magnetic systems work, about what magnetism is, as well as we can parse that in this day and age. And a lot of electronics knowledge to make things work and work well. Going beyond the beloved 555 timer, right? This is a FPGA world nowadays. I mean, it's a gigahertz world. And I think there have been a few things that have held this field back, is that the experimental technologies to work with power and energy haven't evolved at the rate that like digital tools have. We have Arduino now. You can buy an FPGA thing on a DIP carrier, and these things can compute the socks off of anything. And they're like $35 on the internet. But if you want to do, MOSFETs and handling energy with coils and stuff like that, it's still kind of in its infancy. There's no tools for this kind of thing. So as an aside, we had to develop some of those tools as well. I think anybody that does this work in a dedicated sense develops a lot of those tools, right? You just do. If you want to get termites out of a log, it's natural. Excuse me. So we have those things, and putting them together, I think eventually everybody makes a lucky mistake. And we see this a lot in the inventive world, but then because there's no principle on why it works, we can't replicate it. Or we come up with a principle for why it works, but it stands good chances of being wrong. When you follow that, and then that doesn't work either. So it gives the breakthrough energy field, if I can call it that, a little bit of a black eye. Because we have a reliability problem, right? You can't repeat the success. Or success leads people into things, aspects of human nature that just aren't so bright. People get afraid, competitive, whatever it is. So we don't have this technology on the planet yet, even though we're overdue for it. And it's been developed before, right? But it hasn't happened. We have the instinct, at least people close to these aspects of technology. We have the feeling that this is possible. It's not because God or nature is playing a joke on us. We don't have false hearts. We know it's possible. And it's been done. But human nature tends to get in the way. So long and short of it is, there is a transformer device that I'm going to present at the conference that has evidence of real electromagnetic energy gain. If you remember the Moog device popularized by Tom Bearden, Aaron and I were discussing that a little earlier, and this is by no means the Moog device. It doesn't have a real similarity to it. And there may be those that see what is presented and find a similarity, but there's certainly no similarity intended on my part. But it does have what I think is the attractive aspect of being a no moving parts electromagnetic energy machine that has an energy gain. So we don't have the bearings and the RPM limitations and things like that. There's plenty of electrons moving around, but they don't tend to need grease every 10,000 hours. Right? And that has been my focus over the last 10 years, is to develop ways of securing that ambient energy however we can without having to rely on mechanical motion. There are some inherent advantages and some inherent disadvantages in that approach. But for an experimenter on a budget, most of those advantages are pretty desirable. You know? So this did come to pass, I guess you would say, by accident. And in looking back, because I've made a lot of lucky accidents. I mean, this is not the only one, and there have been a lot of things that we can't understand that are sort of easy to replicate. Another presenter in a conference in the past, Mark McKay, was talking about sometimes you can make a spark gap that has a certain shape and a certain discharge profile that will just wipe out electronics. It's not even, you're not even using that much power. And I've noticed the same thing. And when he was talking about this, I said, that's the real deal. I've done it by accident, whatever. And all the computers started rebooting in the room. It like said something to the digital electronics through the airwaves, something like this. It really worked, and you've seen it before too. This, in looking back, has so many similarities to an internal combustion engine. It's almost not funny.
Has all the cycles.
Well, there is the equivalent of a camshaft, a crank. There's definitely a valve timing to it. Most importantly, there's a spark, and I don't mean that in the plasma sense or that there's an arc established, but there's an electromagnetic event that looks just like and acts just like the spark in an engine, because it controls an implosive or explosive event. Depending, in magnetics, it kind of depends on which way you're looking from. If I take a current loop, with the current going, let's call it counterclockwise, right? I'm going to see a south pole in the middle of that kind of thing. But if I turn it around, just change my perspective, now it's going clockwise and I see a north. So north or south, it's mostly a matter of where I'm looking from, right? So I don't know whether to call it implosion or explosion in terms of how the magnetic circuit functions, but there's a sudden event that occurs when that spark happens. And in response to that, just like we have in an internal combustion engine, there's a way that sudden expansion is used. It's leveraged into output energy rather than going back through the carburetor or the input side, and things like this. And it can be easy to sort of get carried away with those analogies. They're stretched, but here it fits pretty darn naturally. And so it's maybe just an interesting aspect of it. I certainly didn't design this thing or intend it to be an imitation of an internal combustion engine, and I've tried that before. I said, wow, those things work. What if we did that magnetically? But it never panned out. This one just happens to have that same fingerprint, for better or for worse. It's interesting to look at it from that perspective, whether it leads to some ability to improve its design in the future as it's refined and sent into the commercial world. It'd be great if that was the case.
So now with the presentation at the conference on this, if it works out, you're going to try to do your best to have an actual demo there where people can see the device.
Yeah.
And one of your goals is to actually let people know enough information on how they can actually replicate it if they have some basic electronic skills, and so they can experience that themselves.
Yeah, that is my goal in taking the time to show up at the conference, and I suppose the risk of taking something that came out of my own mind and exposing it to the world, basically giving it away. I know a lot of inventors, and I've felt this urge as well. You want to keep things close to your chest. You made it. It's your baby. You want to keep it. You don't want to give it away. You don't want somebody to come and steal it or anything like that. And that's what's kept this stuff in the dark for the last 20 years. This kind of technology has been done, but it's that grasping, clinging thing, that everybody from Buddha to Jesus would say, don't do that. Just let it go. Give. And so that's the mentality that I'm coming to share this with. The advantage here is that the device was built entirely with off-the-shelf components. There's no unobtainium in it. You can do it with just off-the-shelf stuff. And maybe the shelves aren't that common. Some of the magnetic materials out there, you have to know where to look and where to go and what to buy. But it's commercially available, is maybe the best way to say it. Meaning that anybody that wants to replicate it doesn't have a big challenge in front of them in how to get this magic material or figure out what the material is or any of that kind of stuff. You can go and get it.
Is it expensive for all the parts, even though the stuff is easily obtainable?
The one that I have worked with, I don't believe so. It should be able to be done start to finish within today's prices. Gosh, it's an interesting question. They have a lot to do, like a lot of on-the-fly adding. I'd say if you got a $250 and you don't spend a lot on shipping these parts, you can probably get it done. The major expense that I would recommend, just given my own 10-year background in this field, is that measuring the energy accurately, if we're going to measure it and turn it into numbers, should cost a lot more than $250. And if it doesn't, you're lucky and there's a new product out there. And those are starting to evolve.
And that 250 is separate from the equipment you're talking about.
Oh, right, yeah. Good measurement equipment can cost thousands and thousands. But the parts here, again, a little bit like the Meg device that Tom Bearden came out with, what is it, like a decade ago now, and popularized. It doesn't really cost that much in materials. There's a know-how involved in putting it together. But there's some quote about like the monkeys and the typewriters, isn't there? You give enough monkeys enough typewriters, and sooner or later one's going to type Shakespeare. Right. And so some of those things can be lucky accidents. This whole thing is the product of a lucky accident. And so I think it's maybe not a bad idea at all to put the design out there and expect that deviations from the design will occur.
Sure.
And nature would call that evolution. So why not? So it's my goal to put out something that anybody who's willing to put in the time and has a little bit of resources can go ahead and build. I intend to be specific about what this really is, and that means schematics, materials. These are the things you need to do it. There's no, I'm going to get you hooked on it, and then you have to pay $100 to buy some book or something with the rest of the details in it. It's going to be the A to Z. Here's what it takes to make the thing work. Because I want to see this get out there and get used. It will take a little bit of expertise, because imagine I was going to put in front of a table a kit to make an internal combustion engine, right? And we can write down how it's going to work, and the piston goes up and down, and there's a spark, and there's gas vapor, and all this kind of stuff, right? Great. But putting it together, might not be something good for a 3-year-old to do. And if I'd never seen a gas engine before, worked with one before, maybe the first one wouldn't run so well, right? I didn't put the rings in right or something like that. There's an element of skill that goes into it that can't be denied with anything that is worthwhile and handles energy. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe there's some things that are simpler. The takeaway, I guess, is that the idea that makes this work, I think, can be understood pretty readily, especially by people who have worked with magnets or induction, or built their own generators, or built their own electric circuits. This isn't going to be over anybody's head, I don't think, from the outset. But like you would expect in building a gas engine, there's a little bit of nuance involved. You got to get the mixture right. You need to know how to pre-lubricate the bearings when you install them. There's these kind of things that I hope are as much of a source of liability for people that want to build it, also perhaps a source of lucky accident, because there are no moving parts. So there's a lot more leeway in making mistakes, because things don't physically break. You'll break a transistor or a MOSFET every now and then, or short something out. But it's a lot nicer to replace a $5 MOSFET than it is a $50 bearing, I suppose. Maybe a little easier.
So with this device, with the type of energy gains, what are we talking about in terms of COP?
The highest I've ever seen it go is a COP of 2. And a lot of the time, at least historically, if we look at the solid-state electromagnetic machines out there, I've spent a lot of time and energy and attention with the Floyd Suite device. Nothing had a COP in the millions. I was thinking in microwatts and putting out a couple hundred watts. And I think that from my own experience, I know that isn't made up. I haven't been able to replicate it per se at that level, but I do know that what comes out of that history, and this is probably a separate topic, that there is something real there. And those kind of COPs can exist. This device functions a lot differently. It's an electrical transformer, and so that means that anything that we induce on the secondary side gets reflected back to the primary side, right? Typically, that's what happens in transformer because of the magnetic coupling. And this transformer still has that magnetic coupling. It ends up building a form of electricity on the secondary circuit that doesn't reflect back to the primary. And the primary side is built such in a way that it goes, it is incapable of receiving that reflection for portions of time. So you get a bit of a one-way action out of it. And so the power that is induced can exceed the power that is inducing. and that's where the energy gain comes from. So it's not a super high COP device, but it's also not a finished device. It is what it is. And the point is that it does yield an energy gain when it's adjusted appropriately. And I should probably mention that the form of energy on the secondary side is not difficult to observe or measure. You know, there's some forms of electrical energy that we can experience. They have effects. You know, I think people have worked with battery charging, for example. We can charge batteries without using current. There's something we put into a battery that you don't really see on an ammeter very much that will charge the battery. And batteries are like, there's the Faraday effect. There's a current-driven chemistry in these things. You're supposed to charge them with current. Well, how do you charge a battery without current? There's something going on there. And it's very difficult to measure. We don't really have a non-Faraday effect meter where we can say, well, you know, here it is and we measured how much, right? So there's an effect there, but it's difficult to deal with because we can't measure it. Because we can't measure it, we can't make a solid science out of it. Because we can't make a solid science out of it, who knows where it goes, right? It's still in hobbyists' hands. It's not in academia yet because there's no number, there's no measurement. In this case, it is measurable energy. And there's a set of effects that happen on the secondary side that are pretty easy to grasp, and they go with the energy gain. So as people tinker with this, assuming there are those who get it to tick and make it run, there are observables on the secondary side. You can say, okay, here's the kind of energy coming out, here's the amps, here's the volts, and you know, if I tune it so that this parameter increases, the COP also will. At least during my time working with this invention, there are some pretty direct correlations there, correlations if you prefer, that make it easy to adjust because there are a few connections between the electromagnetic side and the energy gain side that have already been observed and documented.
Right. And you know, out of any of the devices that I've seen that are legitimately over 1.0 COP, you know, non-heat systems, the common denominator between every single one is what's going on. The output is never reflected back to the front.
Right.
It's related, but it's never directly proportional. And so that's one of the common parameters that everything legitimate seems to kind of follow.
Right.
And you know, that's one principle that I think more people need to pay attention to, because it shows that it's not this, you know, closed system. That it's so. You know, whether it's the Bedini system or there's mechanical oscillators, you know, whether it's magnetic or mechanical or whatever, right, the output is never reflected back to the front. Yeah.
It's an outgrowth of the tried and true principle of equal and opposite reaction. It is probably going to always be true that energy cannot be created, right? It can change form, but creating it is a lot harder to do in this universe than changing form. And we're very lucky that we're awash in energy, right? You and I are sitting in these chairs at about 290 degrees Kelvin, maybe 300 degrees Kelvin. So we're hundreds of degrees above absolute zero. So if we look at the jittering of the molecules and all the substances around us, there's all this motion. It's random, and it's so small that we don't really have a ratchet to rectify it, we think. It's called a magnet. But it's there. And that's why some of these devices can run cold when they seem to be creating energy. They're not. They're consuming energy in a form that hasn't or can't yet be monetized. You know, the ambient temperature here, where the hair on my arm sticks up as the sun sets, is not really a monetizable form of energy. Yeah, there's plenty of heat going around, but we believe that the second principle of thermodynamics precludes any of that. And that's a principle that was developed 150 years ago, 100 years ago. Like, we got iPhones now, but we're still charging them with these steam-operated generators that go back to the time of, like, James Watt. It's embarrassing, right? So some of those thermodynamic principles need updating, just like the iPhone gets updated if we're ever going to charge our iPhones with something besides coal. But some of that thermodynamic thinking stops people from doing the research into what happens if this is not so. Or you can go read, you know, articles on spintronics. And there's all this stuff going on at the atomic level about the interaction between magnetism and heat. And it's almost like boilerplate. You know, if I was a conspiracy guy, I'd say, well, they're making them say that because every one of these white papers concludes that it will make computers faster or make computer memories better or blah, blah, blah. Nobody seems to have the bent to say, yeah, and it might make really good energy machines too. We might be able to rectify heat. We might be able to get 0-point energy into this thing. We might get a more efficient power converter, at least for solar energy. But faster computers aren't much if you're still burning coal to power. And so there's an emergent science out there, but the idea that we can't use ambient random noise energy and rectify that into a form of energy that's polarized and useful, because there's an entropy loop, right? You know, we're taking a random scattered energy and sorting it out into something that isn't scattered. Here's plus, here's minus, here's north, here's south, here's high pressure, here's low pressure, right? So there's a ratchet there, or valve actions. You know, Maxwell called it Maxwell's demon or whatever, right? He thought it up. And a lot of people to this day try to disprove that. They say, well, it would take as much energy to operate the demon as you'd ever get back out and all that kind of stuff. It's that kind of thinking that keeps us addicted to coal. And it's not true, because there are these machines that get cold and put out extra energy. Not that we're creating energy, but we're awash in what we need already, if we're willing to realize that.
Right.
So this is one way of putting that out there, maybe, at least as far as what I would like to present, that might be able to give people a way to get started in observing that and improving it.
Right. And then a lot of people do want things that they can actually build and, you know, experience these kind of results.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, there's a lot of interesting theories presented and that kind of stuff, but one of the things that I like to focus on at this conference is to have as many, you know, demonstrations and have people who, you know, aren't just discussing theory, but are in the lab building things.
Yeah.
You know, now, one of the things, if you're kind of wondering, well, how do you know it's really, you know, like a COP of 2.0 showing twice as much is coming out as what you're putting in, that kind of maybe goes into your background a little bit, where Graham actually has a very extensive background in measuring and validating claims.
Right.
And so if there's anybody qualified to know how to measure something, you know, that's a major part of your background.
Yeah, well, you know, it's worth knowing, and this might not be so present online as it would be, you know, if I had done this as a hobby for the last decade, because I had the very fortunate position of doing it for a job. You know, hired to do this work, and that doesn't make it any easier. In a way, it makes it harder, because belief no longer is an operator. There are inventors out there who I think believed they had something, and that drums up investment, interest, and fame to a certain degree. And I think a few of these people end up realizing that, oh no, it doesn't work after all, because I can't scale it up, or it won't run itself, or things like this. But because there's already money that they've accepted, there's already an element of recognition or fame, there's some expectations now that need to be met. And some people become entirely unscrupulous because they keep wanting to meet the expectations, but there's an integrity gap growing, right? Because they're not telling the truth. And pretty soon that gap gets pretty darn wide, and we all have to go off to jail. And that's happened with a couple inventors that I've at least heard about. I've worked for 10 years in this field, and I began just by building things that weren't always explainable by what I knew about electronics. And I got to the point that I started knowing other people that know more than me about the mathematics of electronics, or just are older and more experienced. And some of these things, there's plenty that we can't explain. And there are plenty of sources of energy out there, most of which are just too minuscule to use. But there's all kinds of stuff going on that is fantastic. We just need one seed that's going to grow into that proverbial mustard tree. Right? With plenty of seeds. So we started getting into that, and the difficult part, I guess, of dealing with all this is that the energy must be measured. And there's a big credibility gap, I think, in the free energy movement as it is, because there's a lot of belief that this can be done. It translates through enthusiasm to say, Eureka, I have done it. And we have unfortunately, a long list of people that have that Eureka moment, but didn't measure the energy right, so got the wrong numbers that weren't physical, or didn't measure it at all and went too far on the basis of belief, which is fine in many places, but for a physical effect, eventually one's going to win, and it tends to be the physics. And so there's a lot of unfulfilled expectation again, right? So in order to, you know, when I got hired to do this, I felt really lucky. It's like, wow, I get to do what my heart wants to do for like a living. But if I make too many mistakes or cried wolf too many times, they're not going to keep me doing this, right? Because nobody wants somebody that gets everybody fired up and then it's a letdown. So I started paying a lot of attention to accurate measurement. And accurate measurement of energy is difficult because it's always inferred. We don't have a probe that can say there's that many watts. For electricity, we have to measure the pressure or the voltage and the flow or the current. And if those things are changing, then we have to look at the timing between them as well. And if there's any error in how we measure those things, and any timing error, then we have a result that isn't physical. If there's magnitude error, distortion, we have a result that isn't physical. And if there's mathematical error on the back end in terms of how we interpret those numbers, there are a lot. It's like a minefield. We don't have a way to measure the flow of joules from location A to location B, right? We can't measure that pointing vector as it has been represented sometimes, right? So if we've got a set of power lines, we can have an electric field between the power lines. Let's say my arms are power lines, right? We can have an electric field between them. We can have a current flowing down the wire, and we have a magnetic field encircling those conductors, and there's some propagation of energy down there like a train rides a rail, right? If we've got a high frequency energy, we can put a ferrite bead around that thing that doesn't even touch anything and choke it out. So there's something in space that we can put an obfuscation into and stop it. But we don't have a probe for that quantity that is flowing. We can measure the consistent fields, or the fields that it consists of, but not the animal itself, if there is indeed such an animal. We can't find it. So because it's always an inferred measurement, there's at least two quantities being measured, and then there's a mathematical operation that has to be done. And so we have the situation right for error. But it's also a place where a sense of precision is developed. You get, I want to say Occam's razor, but that's not necessarily what it is. It lends a very definite discernment to what is going on. And that becomes disappointing. Because often we can talk to people who are in a state of belief about what they have created, and go and measure what they have created, and the numbers don't agree with what they think they have. And it exposes a very difficult and interesting side of human nature when we believe something that's not actually true. And that happens a lot. If it didn't happen so often, if we didn't have so many false alarms, we'd probably be beyond the gas and coal stage of human evolution. We wouldn't need these things anymore if we had better luck and maybe a human nature that was more amenable to success in this field. But a lot of things just get in the way. That's the bottom line. So for a certain portion of that 10 years that I was employed in this field and doing it full time, we did pay attention to that. We listened to claims that were made by inventors and wanted to verify them. Because if any are verifiable, if you can get a second opinion and a third opinion on these things, and everything's thumbs up, right? The inventor says, hey, I got it, and I use my Radio Shack meters. And we're like, great, cool, you got Radio Shack meters and you got it. All right, let's come check it out. Now we're going to come and bring some watt meters, right? Real high resolution digital sampling watt meters. Whoa, there it is again. The meters agree. All right, let's put some digital oscilloscopes on it. Put the math and the probes on it, get everything de-skewed, get everything error corrected, and really look at the numbers. Let's go nanosecond by nanosecond. Slice that energy into pieces and look what those pieces are. And also prove to ourselves that our energy measurement equipment is accurate, right? It's calibrated. You can try to fool it by putting on like pure reactive components. There are ways to tell if you're making a mistake. Let's do all that too. Let's sharpen our knives so they're really, really sharp. Let's cut out the crap. Well, there it is again. The scopes agree. Now you've got something. And anybody with money to invest better be knocking on that door, because you got the next oil. You're the next Alessandro Volta, right? You made the next battery, man. And so that's the best thing to invest in, since like investment itself, right? But we need certainty so we're not wasting our money, because this is a place where money is easily wasted. So there's a great pressure to be accurate. And so that's part of what I paid attention to, is making that accuracy really hit home. So it's a genuine, tried and true accuracy. And a lot of that was just me covering my own behind, because I don't want to be wrong if I'm going to say this works. And I don't want to be wrong if I'm going to say this doesn't work. Right? It's all integrity at that point. And it goes beyond personal integrity into electrical integrity. Not to only trust your instrument because you paid a lot for it, or a little, or whatever, but to prove that it is accurate. And that's done, when we build airplanes, for example, everything that you would use to fix, can you imagine fixing a jet engine with like a torque wrench that wasn't calibrated? Would you measure the pressure in the fuel lines with an instrument that you didn't know if it was accurate or not, right? So we put that same kind of emphasis into energy measurement here. Sure. And that's a wonderful thing to do, because we're no longer deceived by our righteous enthusiasm that we should have for developing this new technology. It's righteous. We're getting past coal. That is awesome. Be enthusiastic. We don't have to breathe this garbage anymore, man. And I lose my words. It's beautiful. But let's not get carried away. Right. We have to be able to prove it. And that's, as important as it is, it's also very disappointing, because a lot of that enthusiasm, you don't know what to do with it after the numbers don't match the expectations. There were a few, very rare few times where, as far as I can tell, there is something real. And a little bit of that hope goes a long way, because you can't get past the fact that there was something.
Now, for 10 years, you were working, doing a lot of these measurements and validations, verifying or to see what the reality is. But even before the last 10 years, you were still involved with a lot of this research even before then, right? Because right now it's 2015. This is Spokane, Washington. You've been living here for quite a while.
96.
Since 96, and it was 16. It was about 16, around 15, 16 years ago. Somebody that I knew, his brother was talking about somebody named Graham here in town that lived somewhere, and had a chalkboard or something on his wall in his basement or whatever, and was, had this math on there, and had some type of motor or something that he was experimenting with on this on his bench or something like that, and I never did quite find out who that Graham was. And then little by little, one thing kind of led to another, but it was always in the back of my mind. And then heard about a Graham through Peter Lindeman and Mark McKay.
Okay, right.
And things seemed to kind of match, and then I think it was the 2012 or 2013 conference you came out to in Hayden, Idaho, so that's where we first met for the first time, and realized that you were the Graham that I heard about 15 years ago. So this is a small town, and
That's great. I've done this for a heck of a long time. I actually came into this line of work through a family connection, and it gets to be a long story, but I was led by my aunt to a fella down in Oregon who had hired a lady by the name of Barbara Hickox to build him a generator that was powerful enough. If you turn the generator with an electric motor, and it makes so much electricity in response that you just plug the motor into it and it keep going. And she claimed to be able to do this. To this date, it's the only gal that I know of that's done this. And bless it, it shouldn't just be a guy's world. Mm-hmm. So this lady had made this thing. It's an issued U.S. patent, and it's ingenious. It was just, like literally a double helix of magnets spinning around, and a real odd mechanical transformation. And sure, Dad would fix cars in the garage when she was little, and she just got that love for mechanical things. So she has this issued U.S. patent, and this man had invested in getting this running. He believed her that this could be done. And they had a falling out, and he fired her. And so he had this box of parts and an issued U.S. patent, but he wasn't a mechanically inclined guy. So what am I going to do? He says, I paid all this money, and I hired this lady to build this thing, and I got this paper that kind of talks about it, but isn't really a set of instructions. Like, where do I go with that? And through that family connection, I was introduced to this guy as maybe somebody that could fill in the gap and put the thing together. So I shipped out down to southern Oregon to go do this on a cattle ranch in a barn. It's a little difficult to build generators in a cattle ranch in a barn, but I did my best. And I couldn't get the darn thing to run. I measured the efficiency of that one with some pretty primitive equipment at about a quarter, about 22% efficiency for that. And that's not to say it's representative of Barbara's invention. It's just my own version with some pretty limited tools at my disposal. But we couldn't take it any further. So yeah, I retired from that job after a while. There was nothing more to be done with it. And after a number of years working as an audio equipment repair guy, my roommate at the time actually had a computer. I didn't have a computer at the time. And this was like the late 90s. Computers weren't all that commonplace, or I didn't know. But I used this computer and I went out on some of these forums, and there's all kinds of stuff on electricity and all that kind of thing. And because I'd been introduced through Barbara Hickok's invention and the experience trying to replicate that, this was like 1996. They had InfoSeek, right? So I looked around for her contemporaries.
I remember InfoSeek.
Yeah, it was like the pre-Google or something like this. And there were all these people who claimed to have done this amazing thing with energy. There was Joe Newman and these miles and miles of wire and these giant coils and all this kind of stuff, and the motors would run themselves, right? And there was Tom Bearden, who would tell you all about how this stuff worked in a new science that I had to read like 8 times in order to even be able to wrap my head around, right? There was all this stuff. There was Floyd Sweet's VTA. Nobody knows how it works, but lo and behold, it does. And it captured my imagination. Wow. Like, there are so many people that have used magnets and done something weird with the magnets, and used wire and did something weird with the wire, and just, like, Faraday should be proud. We really, like, did induction 2.0 here. And it's been done by person after person after person after person, and there's got to be a common thread if this many people are seeing something special happen in their own way. Like, there's even more than one way to get that to happen, and that's amazing. I want to be involved. So I just started putting out mostly my thoughts and a little bit about the stuff that I built as a hobby online, and that exposure led to being fortunate enough to be supported full-time to do this kind of work.
It's awesome to be able to do what you love.
No, it is. And if doing what you love is very hard, because true success here is very hard, right? It makes me want to maybe be a chef, because there are recipes to follow when you're a chef, right? Or if you want to be a mechanical engineer, there's plenty of computer software out there that'll do finite element analysis and show you where the streams of metal are. These are tools you can use. And you come up with something strong or something delicious, some wonderful thing that's a pretty reliable outcome of the effort. And in this line of work, after a decade of kind of that Edison search, right? Okay, I tried making a light bulb. Well, that filament of bamboo didn't work. Throw it away, right? And I tried this light bulb. Well, I used Captain Redbeard's beard hair. That didn't work. I tried this. I used banana peel. Well, that didn't work either. And eventually make that lucky mistake of taking the cotton thread and accidentally burning it into conductive carbon, resistive carbon. And that resistance dissipates the energy to make the light. And who knows how many times Edison tried to make his bulb. Maybe it was 100. I think our folklore's gotten us to 3,000. 3,000 attempts, and it may well have been 3,000 attempts. But this search was very much the same, is that there was a lot of, initially sort of who was it, like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross had like the 5 stages of grief. And there's the denial, and then it ends up in acceptance, and there's these emotional stages you go through. Doing it full time is a little bit like that, because there was so much enthusiasm, but now the measurements aren't matching the enthusiasm, and then there's sort of an acceptance of it, and then there's what would you call the flowering of that acceptance, and let's be very, very accurate in measuring energy. Let's try everything we can, but the emphasis, just as much as it needs to be on the creativity to come up with the ideas in the first place that might work, needs to be equally distributed to the accuracy of measuring energy. Because at the end of the day, energy is money. And if you're not counting your money, you don't know how much money you have, right? So if we're going to really monetize energy, or at least monetize the search for a new kind of energy, we have to treat energy like money. You got to count it down to the penny. And if we're dealing with energy is like a molar substance. 1 ampere of current is a mole of electrons moving per second. And a mole is, what is that, 6.28 times 10 to the 23rd? And it's like you run out of stars before you get to that number. It's huge. And all it is 1 amp. Find me a 1 amp fuse, it's like tiny. So find me a 50 amp fuse, find me a 100 amp fuse. It's actually only a couple orders of magnitude higher, and something that's got 28 orders of magnitude on it already. Measuring energy is a little bit the same way. So energy goes down to like the erg or something, right? It becomes sort of a quantum blur at the bottom of it. Quantum blurs are tiny little things. So 1 watt is maybe like 1 volt times 1 amp, right? So you still got that Avogadro's number in there. Measuring it then is always an approximation. And to be accurate about something you must approximate is almost quixotic. How do you do that? It requires a lot of time and attention to really, really get that knife sharp, so to speak. and make sure it's sharp. And in some places, sometimes if you're measuring DC power and you've got a big excess, if we have a DC only breakthrough energy device that puts out 100 watts on the watt, you can do that with pretty cheap meters. You might be off by 10%. Who cares? It still works. But for things like the transformer that I'd like to present at your conference, the margins are smaller and it needs to be measured more accurately. And that's how I discovered it. I don't know if just having a bunch of multimeters on the bench would work.
Right. Now, there is a website coming together. It's under construction, but eventually, maybe by the conference or after the conference, it'll be showcasing some of your work, like this device, and so be on the lookout for that. That'll be probably a few months down the road.
Oh, definitely.
And is there any final words or anything you want to share with everybody before we go? And we might have an opportunity to chat a couple more times before the conference. And
yeah, I hope so. I guess first I'd just say thanks for being inclined to do this kind of work. I don't know who's watching on the other end of that camera, but to be interested in this in the first place, to be aware of it, is really something special. And to be inclined to be part of making it present on this planet rather than just a garage experiment, but really something real, deserves applause. It really does. For anybody inclined to build the magnetic system, the electric system, and work with the technology that I'm specifically here to give to you, the website that Aaron's talking about, I intend to be a resource for support. As any other new technology out there, like Arduino microprocessors have got really big, and part of the reason for that is because there's a community behind it, and those communities are always organic. You can't build them, but the thing that makes them thrive is support. It's a little bit like planting a garden, and you put your seeds out there, you do the best you can, but if it's not fertile, if there's not support for it, then it won't thrive. So on that website, I'm going to put the things, at least initially, that I think will help support this. And the rest of that support material will come, from any group that gathers around it that wants to pursue it, because there's always going to be things that come up unexpectedly, or requests. Who knows what it is? I can't predict it, and I don't presume to even want to predict it. That's a feedback process with a group of people that are pursuing something, and that website will be the avenue where that kind of support can happen. So it's not like you just get a set of instructions that, clear as they may be, are only that. It's a little bit like trying to learn calculus out of a book. And it's nice to be able to raise your hand. So that'll be what ends up being on the website as this grows.
And we'll definitely be sharing that through the forum, through the conference website, the newsletters, that kind of stuff. So we'll do what we can to get the word out. And so thank you for taking time out of your schedule. And
hey, same to you, Aaron. Thanks for putting this whole thing together.
Absolutely. Be looking forward to the conference. And so that's the 2015 Energy Science and Technology Conference with Graham Gunderson. And right now, we limit it to about 150 people every year, just because of the space of the place. And it's not a big convention center or anything. Kind of stays a little bit smaller, a little more intimate. People can have a little bit more time to actually chat with the speakers more, and just kind of get to know them and stuff. It's pretty casual atmosphere. It's pretty fun. And so go to EnergyScienceConference.com, and out of 150 seats available, there's only about 60 left. And so register as soon as you can. We're doing it in the middle of July because the last conferences were at the very end of June, where we had Hoop Fest. It's the world's largest 3-on-3 basketball tournament downtown Spokane, plus the triathlon, the Ironman triathlon in Coeur d'Alene. So a lot of the hotels are booked up, and they increased the prices on those. And so in the middle of July, we're July 10th, 11th, and 12th. There are no major events, so there's a lot of hotels and motels available for very reasonable prices. But the closer we get to the conference, people are going to start filling those up. So go ahead and get registered, and we'll see you at the conference. So thank you very much.
Yeah, hope to see you there.
Okay.
Stay. And we see this a lot in the inventive world, but then because there's no principle on why it works, we can't replicate it. Or we come up with a principle for why it works, but it stands good chances of being wrong. When you follow that, and then that doesn't work either. So it gives the breakthrough energy field, if I can call it that, a little bit of a black eye. Because we have a reliability problem, right? You can't repeat the success. Or success leads people into things, aspects of human nature that aren't so bright. We get afraid, competitive, whatever it is. So we don't have this technology on the planet yet, even though we're overdue for it. And it's been developed before, right? But it hasn't happened. We have the instinct, at least people close to these aspects of technology. We have the feeling that this is possible. It's not because God or nature is playing a joke on us. We don't have false hearts. We know it's possible. And it's been done. But human nature tends to get in the way. So long and short of it is, there is a transformer device that I'm going to present at the conference that has evidence of real electromagnetic energy gain. If you remember the Moog device popularized by Tom Bearden, Aaron and I were discussing that a little earlier, and this is by no means the Moog device. It doesn't have a real similarity to it. And there may be those that see what is presented and find a similarity, but there's certainly no similarity intended on my part. But it does have what I think is the attractive aspect of being a no moving parts electromagnetic thing. One thing that amazes me is there's some inventors that come out with a theory and they follow that theory, and then it works. That must be really nice because there was no theory here. There's plenty of knowledge about how magnetic systems work, about what magnetism is, as well as we can parse that in this day and age. And a lot of electronics knowledge to make things work and work well. Going beyond the beloved 555 timer, right? This is a FPGA world nowadays. I mean, it's a gigahertz world. And I think there have been a few things that have held this field back, is that the experimental technologies to work with power and energy haven't evolved at the rate that like digital tools have. We have Arduino now. You can buy an FPGA thing on a DIP carrier, and these things can compute the socks off of anything. And they're like $35 on the internet. But if you want to do, MOSFETs and handling energy with coils and stuff like that, it's still kind of in its infancy. There's no tools for this kind of thing. So as an aside, we had to develop some of those tools as well. I think anybody that does this work in a dedicated sense develops a lot of those tools, right? You just do it. If you want to get termites out of a log, it's natural. Excuse me. So we have those things, and putting them together, I think eventually everybody makes a lucky mistake, and it's almost not fun.
Has all the cycles.
Well, there is the equivalent of a camshaft, a crank. There's definitely a valve timing to it. Most importantly, there's a spark, and I don't mean that in the plasma sense or that there's an arc established, but there's an electromagnetic event that looks just like and acts just like the spark in an engine, because it controls an implosive or explosive event. Depending, in magnetics, it kind of depends on which way you're looking from. If I take a current loop, with the current going, let's call it counterclockwise, right? I'm going to see a south pole in the middle of that kind of thing. But if I turn it around, just change my perspective, now it's going clockwise and I see a north. So north or south, it's mostly a matter of where I'm looking from, right? So I don't know whether to call it implosion or explosion in terms of how the magnetic circuit functions, but there's a sudden event that occurs when that spark happens. And in response to that, just like we have in an internal combustion engine, there's a way that sudden expansion is used. It's leveraged into output energy rather than going back through the carburetor or the input side, and things like this. And it can be easy to sort of get carried away with those analogies. They're stretched, but here it fits pretty darn naturally. And so it's maybe just an interesting aspect of it. I certainly didn't design this thing or intend it to be an imitation of an internal combustion engine, and I've tried that before. I said, wow, those things work. What if we did that magnetically? But it never panned out.
Hey, this is March 30th, 2015. This is Aaron Murakami, and I'm sitting here with Graham Gunderson. And Graham is a longtime researcher and developer in the so-called free energy field, if you want to call it that. Overunity research, some of the,
we always call it breakthrough energy.
Breakthrough
There's
energy,
conventional
yeah.
energy if you like coal.
Right.
There's alternative energy if you like wind and solar,
Yeah.
but it's going to have trouble powering the whole world. We
Right.
need a breakthrough.
Right. And so you have a long history with these technologies, and we can maybe go into a little bit of your background after.
Sure.
And Graham is going to be one of the presenters at the 2015 Energy Science and Technology Conference on July 10, 11, and 12 in downtown Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And the website for that is energyscienceconference.com. You can go on there, look at the schedule, see some of the other speakers. Graham will be sharing the stage with people like John Bedini, Eric Dollard, Paul Babcock, Jim Murray. You know, a lot of the people who are, kind of considered some of the pioneers of the modern, free energy or Tesla science movement, whatever you want to call it. And so the presentation that you're going to be doing is based on a device that you were working on and kind of stumbled upon a certain principle and realized that there were some energy gains there, and you were looking into that. You want to kind of go into a little bit about that?
Yeah, you bet. This didn't come about by any conscious effort. I don't think. Energy machine that has an energy gain. So we don't have, the bearings and the RPM limitations and things like that. There's plenty of electrons moving around, but they don't tend to need grease every 10,000 hours. Right? And that has been my focus over the last 10 years, is to develop ways of securing that ambient energy however we can without having to rely on mechanical motion. There are some inherent advantages and some inherent disadvantages in that approach. But for an experimenter on a budget, most of those advantages are pretty desirable. So this did come to pass, I guess you would say, by accident. And in looking back, because I've made a lot of lucky accidents. I mean, this is not the only one, and there have been a lot of things that we can't understand that are sort of easy to replicate. Another presenter in the conference in the past, Mark McKay, was talking about sometimes you can make a spark gap that has a certain shape and a certain discharge profile that will just wipe out electronics. You're not even using that much power. And I've noticed the same thing. And when he was talking about this, I said, that's the real deal. I've done it by accident, whatever. And all the computers started rebooting in the room. It like said something to the digital electronics through the airwave, something like this. It really worked, and you've seen it before too. This, in looking back, has so many similarities to an internal combustion engine.